Welcome to Publishing Power. My name is Joellen, and it is my pleasure to be your host today. Today, we have a very fun guest with us, one of our own editors from First Editing, Kristin McTiernan, and she is here to tell us all about memoirs. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Me too. It's not so often we get to spend a lot of time talking about what we have here. But before we get started, let me introduce Kristin a little better. After waffling between joining a convent and enlisting in the Marines, she settled on the latter at age of 17. So she's got a very interesting background. After 3 years, 4 sprained ankles, ouch, and a badly herniated disc, she ended her time in the Marines, and then she studied English literature. She uses her degree to become a professional writer and editor with many books, I understand, and she specializes in memoirs here, along with science fiction and fantasy. She's doing this full-time on freelance basis for more than 10 years, and she is going to stay with us for many, many, many more years. Welcome, Kristin. I understand we can talk about memoirs today. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, and I was so surprised when I started working with First Editing. I thought the majority of what I would get would be like dissertations and work product and things that people had to do as part of their education or their work. But what I found was that the most common thing I got was memoirs, and people loved to write them. And this was people who wanted to write a memoir for their family, or people who wanted to write a memoir to be published and be rich and famous. And the passion behind memoirists was so different from other types of, novelists and nonfiction authors. And it was such an experience, and I had to really hone in on exactly why they wanted to write the memoir, what they wanted to accomplish, and most importantly, what issues memoirists run into versus other writers. And one thing that I found, and I feel comfortable saying that I've edited probably 1,000 memoirs. At this point, I've been doing this since like 2011, and I get so many. And they all kind of follow the same path, where they know they have a message, and they know they want to get that message out to their audience, but they don't know how to do it. And so what I've found is I created a system for memoirists, and I usually like to kind of talk the clients through this in just kind of an essay. It's like, okay, well, here's the changes I made and here's why. And the main thing that I point out to them is I ask them, hey, have you ever heard of Frank McCourt? And some people haven't, and some people have. And I'm like, okay, well, have you heard of Angela's Ashes? And everybody has. Mm-hmm. And the thing I like to point out, because memoirists feel like, oh, well, who am I to put my story out there? I'm nobody. I'm not Hillary Clinton. I'm nobody special. And it's like, well, nobody knew who Frank McCourt was either. Nobody. But everybody knows about Angela's Ashes. There's a movie made and everything like that. And the reason that that memoir hit, even though no one knew who this Irish guy was because of the power of his story and the structure of his memoir. And he structured it like fiction. And that's what I want to get across to all memoir authors. It's like, yes, you're writing a true story, but a memoir is not an autobiography. And I'd say that's the kiss of death for memoirs. When people treat it like it is, they like, chapter 1, I am born. Chapter 2, I went through grammar school. And it's like, no, darling. No one is reading this book because they want to hear about your, tales of a third grade nothing. Nobody reads it for that. So the question is, what are they reading it for? What is your theme for your memoir? Are you writing to tell us about addiction? Are you writing to tell us about overcoming a health crisis or having a family member who was in crisis? Are you writing about finding your faith? What are you writing about? What is the central theme of your memoir? And once you know that, then you can go ahead and construct a scene list. Okay, well, what snatches of my life go along with this theme? Because not everything does, and not everything is interesting. They were interesting to us because they were stressful or they were exciting. But as far as a third party, especially if you're publishing this for a wide audience, people don't know you. You have to say, okay, well, this might be interesting to my kids because they were there or because they've heard me talk about it so often, but it won't be interested to Jane, the reader of Memoirs. And so constructing that scene list is very much like constructing a novel. It's like, okay, well, what's the setup and what's the payoff? What's the inciting incident? What got me started on this journey that ultimately brought me to the, apotheosis that made me want to write this book? Mm-hmm. And once I put it in those frameworks for memoirists, I just see, virtually the light bulb go off like, oh, okay. And it's like, freeing, because I think a lot of memoirists feel like they have to include everything, or they're being dishonest, or they're going to hurt someone's feelings because they don't mention Joan from church. And it's like, well, no, Joan from church doesn't contribute to this part of your story.
Right, right. Basically, I know that we've been working with story coaching, and we're working with these outlines and these precise ways of making sure that we don't leave out any of the details of the algorithms, really, of successful storytelling now. And it's weird that we can break it down now into, exact pieces of the puzzle. I think we have it internally in our heart. We know what makes a good story, but it's only now with, say, artificial intelligence and different things that we're starting to say, no, this is defined in this way and this is defined in this way. So I know that you've got an outline for us on memoirs and how to make that. So please just walk us through it so that our listeners can understand a little better.
Well, it's basically just a worksheet to keep beside you as you're picking your scenes. And the first thing that it asks you to do is your theme. Before you get to anything, it wants to know what your theme is, because you really can't set up any of your scenes, or what kind of details or people you need to include until you have that theme. So that's the first line of it.
Mm-hmm.
Then it moves on to the setting. Now, of course, if you move around a lot, there's going to be maybe several settings, and that's okay. But this gives you a space to say, okay, well, here's my theme, and here's the locations that my journey took place within. And once you start thinking of those places, it also helps details come back to you, as far as what was the weather. So for instance, if your setting is Great Britain, it's going to be, oh gosh, I just remember it rained there all the time. And, part of my journey was I missed Miami. Ugh, that would be a change. And so once you get that setting in, then that works really well in activating memory. I remember I watched the masterclass of Neil Gaiman lately, and he had an exercise where he was like, just think of the most embarrassing moment of your childhood, and think about everything that happened. And it really helps get you into the, oh yeah, I remember that auditorium used to smell like chewing gum, and just little things that you forget. So setting is very important. Right. And then I take you down through parts, not necessarily acts, because, it's not fiction, but we still segment it into parts. So for the first part, what is the inciting incident? What happened that set you on your path to change, or what motivated you to, kind of realize that you needed to change, or what sparked your journey? So if it was an illness of a loved one, or if it was an injury for you, or discovering that you had an addict in your family, whatever that inciting incident is, that needs to come first. And then inevitably you go down to what is your initial conflict. And people think that this has to be like an argument or something explosive, and it doesn't necessarily have to be. A conflict could be, my loved one was ill and I had to miss a lot of work, and that created tension because, I had a very understanding boss, but there's only so much work you can miss without being fired. Things like that. You don't have to have explosions and combat and things going off for it to qualify as combat or as conflict. And it's basically something that drives you to behave in the way that you did. Because I think the most powerful memoirs are the ones that tell the truth of the writer. Everybody wants to paint themselves in kind of the best light, but I think that when people feel that they can't relate to a person, it's the Mary Sue complex in fiction, where the person who's telling us the story just seems better than we are, and we would not behave so gracefully under fire if we don't understand their behavior. That kind of creates a wall between you and the audience. And so having these conflicts in here is just very important. So I've got a part for the external conflict. What challenges did you encounter that kept you from changing, that kept you from being where you wanted to be? And then way after that, after the conflict, after the setting, after the theme, then I have the backstory, because backstory can be so important, but fiction and memoirists alike kind of fall into something where they have the info dump right at the beginning, where here's what you need to know about my grandfather, and here's what you need to know about my childhood. It's like, well, we might need to know those things, but we definitely don't need to know them right there in chapter 1. That is the best way to get a reader just to close up on you. So I was very strategic in putting the backstory after that.
Right. You need to know the person first. You need to want to know their background, to want to connect with them first. I mean, you want to know about your friend's family and background, but somebody walking down the street, I don't need to know all of your information. So you need to
Exactly. Like, I
establish
need to
the,
root for you first.
yeah, establish the connection and the relationship first, and then go on with that. So explain, how do we do that? How do we give them that information in a desirable method?
Well, the best way to do that is to start with the action. We need to follow you on a path. So if you start the story, I was born, we're like, we don't care. But if you start the story in a doctor's office holding your husband's hand, hearing that, well, you've got stage 4 cancer,
Mhm.
then we're like, oh, well, what's going on in your family, And then you add small in details. It's like, I grabbed my husband's hand and he pulled it away. And we're immediately drawn in because we can empathize with that feeling. It's like, well, why would he pull his hand away? Is it because there's been, a betrayal in the marriage, or is maybe he just a jerk? We want to know. We're invested. And so you drop those little hints, and it's in the action that we're like, oh, I can relate to that. And I want to know more about this person. Because as humans, we kind of want to know, whose side should I be taking here? That's why a lot of times when we see those celebrity, articles, we want to click on it because we're like, well, I need to weigh in here on who is at fault. That's just a very human need. And so when you leave those breadcrumbs where you show and don't tell, or if you've got an adult child who's just being a brat to you, it's like, well, is the kid really a jerk, or is there something we don't know here? It's you never really do know. And just starting in the action and showing what people are doing and having the interactions between people, and especially if you don't drop all the information right at once, it motivates people to say to themselves, okay, let me follow along here because I want to solve this mystery and see who I most relate to in this story.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's interesting. So you can walk them through that step by step on how to basically get into their memoirs. How do you order the chapters and the sections? How would that help?
I would say you order your sections, and you don't have to do this linearly. It really depends on what story you're telling. Telling a story of illness, that's a big one. That would probably benefit most from being in a linear tale.
Mhm.
However, if you're telling a story about your military service and you had multiple deployments where different things happen, you don't necessarily have to tell those in a linear fashion. Because if your theme is, dealing with PTSD at home, your rising action were going to be, the series of events that most scars you. So for instance, just because one event happened later, it doesn't mean it was more scarring than the one that happened on your first deployment. And so you want to bring the audience in the most logical way. It's like, okay, well, let's start, I'm at home, I have PTSD, I'm very upset. Now let me bring you back to my third deployment in Iraq. And here's a minor thing that happened that changed my viewpoint. But then here's my first deployment in Iraq that had this major thing that impacted me. And so you want to order your chapters and your sections in accordance with the action and what you want to reveal to the audience, not necessarily this happened and this happened and this happened. And that's the glory of memoir, that you have much more flexibility to tell your story in the most logical fashion as opposed to being constrained by the dates in which the events happened.
Right. I think it's always, I mean, I'm not a memoirist. So for me, I love to read autobiographies. So when we go into memoir, though, I know that, okay, wait a minute. I normally do read chronologically. So we're trying to go back into the inspirational and, yeah, the story. And the story is all
Right.
where we are. So I think that's very interesting to
Because
follow.
one great example was Traci Lords. And for the younger people, Traci Lords was a young lady who was basically trafficked into the world of adult entertainment as a teenager. And when it was discovered that the majority of her films were done while she was underage, it was a huge scandal for the adult entertainment industry. And people were like, well, how could this happen? And unfortunately, because this was during the early 90s, she was kind of vilified as if she was the bad guy here. And so I think it was in the early 2000s, she wrote her memoirs, and she was featured on Oprah, which is how I came to read it. And it was really just a wonderful example of how a memoir can be done right, because she started in her childhood when we met her stepfather, which is the person who ultimately trafficked her. And she just really drew you in, where we just observed his behavior and the things he said to his stepdaughters. And it leads every adult reader to go, that's not right. But we also understand that why she as a child did not see that it wasn't right. And it was such a well-written memoir, but it wasn't like literary. It wasn't inaccessible. It's not something that you're going to read at Harvard. But it was in, she used common language and just, it was very accessible to everybody, but still a very powerful story. And so I like to refer people to that. It's like, you don't have to be Dostoevsky to write a powerful memoir that really touches people's hearts.
Right, right. It's very important, very important. So when we've written our book, and I believe you wanted to tell us a little bit about getting the right readers in to look at our book here, getting the right readers to your book and getting those reviews that are also important when you start to launch. Can you give us
Definitely. There is a temptation, and this is for any genre, to just tell literally everybody hey, I've got a book out, go buy it. But generally speaking, if you're on Amazon, if you're on Drafted Digital, those things are powered by algorithms. Right. And so what you want to do is you want to decide, who is this book for? If it's for your family, fine. But chances are it's not. You're writing a memoir because you want to help other moms or you want to help other service people. Whoever that is, that's who you want to target. So if you have a newsletter, you want to have a newsletter only for other veterans or for other moms. And you want to say, hey, I've got my book out. Or if you're on a Facebook group, you want to tell your Facebook group, hey, other moms or other veterans, I have this book out and here's what it's about. And the most important thing to do this is to have not only purchasers, but reviewers. And reviewers are great, especially those advanced reviewers. It's like, I'd love to give you a free copy of my book. I see what you read on Amazon or I see what you read on Goodreads, and you read the types of books that I write. I would be so honored to give you this free copy of my book. And if you wouldn't mind writing an honest review of it. And that's the key part. It's got to be an honest review, and you can't pay them for it or anything like that, because then Amazon will ding you. But it's just so important to target exactly who you want, and if you want women between the age of 19 and 27, then don't ask your dad to read and review your book. And I know I made that mistake with my first book, and I know a lot of authors do. It's like, look, just purchase is a purchase, anybody buy it. But it's like, no, all of our modern book selling mechanisms are powered by algorithms, all of them. And so regardless of whether you're wide or Amazon only, you want to make sure that the people who are buying your book in the first 30 days and reviewing your book in the first 30 days are your target audience. Who do you want Amazon to show ads to? Who do you want Amazon to kind of give a nudge like, hey, you like this, would you like, this memoir as well? So understanding who your audience is super important, and it also helps you construct your theme. And if you're constructing a theme for, say, a sick child, that can be not necessarily just be moms, that's moms and dads, but you're not going to be probably targeting the young Generation Z folks. It's like, okay, I appreciate you 16-year-old, but you're not really who I'm looking for at this moment.
No. So where would they go to find this? Where would they start? Because I really like to always start from the very beginning. As you know, we get many clients who come in, they've written their book, they have what they think is good, now they just want to edit it, and then they're going to publish it, and they're going to be done. But that, unfortunately, they've just opened another door, which is editing, and after that comes another door. You've got to start your launching, your publishing, and your launching, and your marketing, and your platform, your audience building. And funny enough, a lot of this needs to be happening before and during the writing process. And it's not that it's too late. It's never too late. However, it is important to be aware of those things. So I think if you could just give us a few places online that they can start, or they're looking for Memoirists, then I think then they can at least start digging in a little bit deeper, because this does really require eye-opening if you've not been down there or thinking in this bigger, grander method.
Right. The two big sites that I would recommend are Prolific Works, which is a great place to build your mailing list, because what you do is you put either your complete or a portion of your work on Prolific Works for free, and then people who want to read it enter their email and they get to read it for free.
Awesome.
And you have the option of asking them for reviews or even for feedback if that's the stage that you're at. You can say, okay, and only people who are interested in memoirs will be clicking on your books. These are not going to be people who are like, oh, well, I only like supernatural romance. It's like, no, they know it's a memoir, and you're going to have this targeted list of people who enjoy reading memoirs. Mm-hmm. And another one is Goodreads. Goodreads is a wonderful resource for ARC reader copies or beta readers. Honestly, they've changed their advertising. So I wouldn't recommend advertising there. But if you're just looking for reviewers, if you're looking for feedback, Goodreads is just a wonderful place to go. And people will happily do it for free.
Mhm.
A lot of authors are concerned about plagiarism, and especially for memoirists, honestly, this is not a thing that really happens. The theft that happens for independent authors is that if you offer your book for free on Amazon, somebody will scrape it up and they'll put it for free on one of the aggregated sites. But here's the thing, anyone who clicks on it will probably have like spyware downloaded on their computer. So no one wins in that situation. So honestly, plagiarism and having your story stolen, you know, it's not something you need to worry about. You know, your work is protected by copyright, you know, from the moment you start composing it on your computer. So a lot of newbie authors are concerned about that. They don't want to get reviews on Goodreads because they're afraid someone's going to steal it. It's like, that's not a thing. It's really okay.
I often wonder if it's not a subconscious way of procrastinating. You know,
I think it
I'm
is. And it's
too afraid.
fear.
I'm too afraid. I don't want to. Somebody's going to steal it anyhow. So, you know, and it's like, well, or maybe you're just afraid of what people are going to think, because
Mhm.
now it's gone from being on your computer being to the next stage. And that is a big step, but I encourage everyone to go ahead and do that. I mean, obviously we're professional editors, so we want to look and read, but it only makes you better. And most people have way more than one book inside of them. So
Oh,
it's
yes, definitely. And most first-time authors start with that memoir
Mhm.
and they realize, you know, I'm pretty good at this. And so then they'll write a series of fiction books that are maybe inspired, like maybe by the same theme, but this time they have more freedom because it's fiction. They're like, oh, this is much easier when it's not writing about me. And you're right, it is.
It's not so personal. And you can still put yourself in there, but you don't necessarily have to be acknowledged for that. So that's really fun.
Exactly. And I would say most fictional works, there's a piece of the author in there and several of the characters. That's my hypothesis.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think anybody can run from that. They always say, oh no, it's all fictional. And you go, but I know you. And
Mhm.
this looks very familiar.
Yes. My first book, I gave it to my brother-in-law, and he was like, I could almost hear you speaking in my ear through this character. I'm like, yeah, maybe she resembles me a little bit.
Well, that's the easiest. We always write about what we know best. So
Hmm.
knowing yourself is always the easiest and best. So I think basically, I think we've got a really good outline here of how to get started as a memoir, and to think about those points of conflict and the points of organization, and do we need to be in chronological order or not, and using the advantage of going back in what do you say, flashback, or yeah, taking those kinds of elements and putting together. So is there anything else that you would like to mention of what we need to include or exclude in the memoirs before we finish today?
I do want to put a note, like there's sometimes a temptation for people to write what I like to call a coward's memoir, where it's basically a memoir, but they call it fiction.
Right.
And I would say, I mean, sometimes there are reasons, like if you're a victim of abuse or if there are issues where you're concerned about being sued, that's an excellent reason to call it fiction. And if so, I would definitely recommend reading Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, and she gives some really great advice for writing fiction that isn't really fiction and how to avoid
Mhm.
litigiousness. But excluding those situations, if you're feeling the urge to say that it's fiction, ask yourself why. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of that your community will think less of you because of your past mistakes? Are you afraid that, you know, just general strangers on the internet will have nasty things to say about you? And they will, because that's the internet, mind you. But then I want you to look at what your theme is. What story are you telling? And it's probably an important one. This story is important, and the fact that it is true and it happened to you and you lived through this, that's a truth that needs to be told. And so it can feel like such a violation and exposure to just be like, okay, here's my life and here's my mistakes and the things I wish I had never said and the things people said to me that they wish that they had never said now. But it's in that ugliness that gives other people the strength to say, you know what? My life isn't so messed up and I'm not such a bad person
Yeah.
because this person went through that and so can I. And that's the beauty of memoirs. And so even though it's tempting to just, oh, I'll just publish it as fiction and it'll be fine. It's like, no, stand by your story. You know, own that truth and stand in your authority to tell it. Like that would be my advice.
That's great. That's great. I really appreciate that. I think it's the very truth, because it's hard. It's very hard. We've all got our private stories, and
Yeah.
we've got the story that we're telling ourselves. We have the story that we're telling others. And then we have, you know, whatever that real story is in the background. And it's very interesting when we try to be more honest in what we think or what we recall happened at that time. But more importantly, what is the, you know, what is the theme? What are you trying to help others deal with? And that's what it all comes down to. It doesn't have to be fiction, nonfiction. It just needs to be helpful, I think, and
Definitely.
you know, connecting with other people on whatever level, on the dirty, the ugly, the beautiful, the kind, and sometimes just purely pain. So I think that's a good way to do it. So thank you so much, Kristin. I appreciate this. This is always great. We will have you back again. Again, Kristin is one of our editors here at First Editing, and she is fantastic. And if you're looking for memoir help, we will definitely connect you to and get that all to work. And thank you for visiting Publishing Power today.
Thanks, Joelle.